AI, we've established it's got a lot of buzz, it's got a lot of money behind it, but how's it going to impact your lives at the office? And is it a real thing now? Who better to tell you than the guys at Truvada? We got Brett Turner, we got Joseph Drambarean. I'm going to start with you because you actually have used this stuff. Now, tell me about the genesis of when you first heard about this AI thing, when you started playing with it, and how it kind of trickled down and coming to market with a product.
It's a great question. Honestly, this is something that we were laughing about when we first saw ChatGPT come out, and it's not like ChatGPT hasn't been around, right? It's been in incubation for years now, and we've seen examples of what it can do for at least a year. And it's funny that what caught the general population's attention was an implementation of that technology in the form of a chatbot, right? Because we've had chatbots.
We've had chatbots for a really long time. It's the Turing test is literally a chatbot. That's the entire idea.
And the funny thing about that is that it's the ability to be able to demonstrate the effectiveness of, if you will, a benevolent AI, an AI that can intelligibly respond to any query, right? In the past, chatbots were very limited, right? You would have to give them a specific context, and maybe they'd be really good at a customer service task, or maybe they'd be good at a specific area, and you would see it, airlines would use it, banks would use it for customer service, and it's because if you give it a narrow focus, it could be effective. The difference is that ChatGPT had this crazy amount of knowledge. It literally learned against the entire backdrop of the internet, which meant that any topic you throw at it, it could be finance, it could be mathematics, it could be philosophy, it could be law. It doesn't matter. It has pretty much read every textbook that exists about that topic. So when we first started to look at it, we were laughing because we thought to ourselves, there isn't really anything new that has occurred here.
Right.
And the other kind of implication of all of it is that it has not solved the old basic problems that large language models still have, which is being able to do simple arithmetic, being able to infer in a complex mathematical kind of series of equations the right answer.
Let me stick a pin in that and talk to you, Brett Turner. You're CEO of this company. You're in the business of allocation. Ultimately, the decisions you make in terms of where this company is going to focus are going to determine a big chunk of the success. How did you see this as something different as opposed to just a flavor of the day kind of long shot in terms of putting Truvada resources towards this?
Well, I still remember too, I was having breakfast. I think I'm talking to Joseph while I'm eating breakfast. Everybody knows I love breakfast. Most important meal of the day. I'm talking to Joseph and he's like, did you hear what just happened? And he starts telling stories and just the stuff that was the hallucinating event, like at Microsoft. Yeah. And it would seem like every other day there was something popping up that was just crazy. And Joseph all along has been experimenting with this, and we're trying to figure out there's aspects that, Truvada's story is leading up to this. So all of the underpinnings, we've been preparing a lot of the table, setting the table for something like this. And so having this as sort of a breakthrough moment, and then,
we weren't new to AI like that. No. That's the thing that, we don't talk about it often enough, but we had been working on AI technology for years at this point. It's easily 4 years. And the reason why it's so interesting that ChatGPT has caused this inflection is because you ultimately need to have a foundation in AI technology to take advantage of these types of solutions. So there's this kind of division in the marketplace and tech companies that approach AI. There are companies that can build on top of other technology like ChatGPT, and they might take the abilities of ChatGPT and do something else to automate your life, right? And there are a lot of examples of that. Some of the most fun ones are ones where, you can book travel. Right. ChatGPT, hey, tell me how to have the most amazing vacation in Capri and, figure out all the flights that are the cheapest and the best hotels and all of that. Amazing.
Which kind of sounds like fancy Yelp to me, though.
It's fancy Yelp, right?
But in terms of, now, it's not the first product you brought to market. So how is this different for you from that side, from the development side, and in terms of creating applications that actually are functional and change the way people do their jobs?
So what we had done is focused a ton on the AI front, on the kind of mathematics side, being able to do calculations and infer insights out of data organically in a way that, created pretty incredible experiences for our customers. Where ChatGPT introduced a breakthrough is by taking its ability to understand any topic under the sun and combining it with our AI and analytics capabilities to kind of create this system where you could ask it anything, and then because of the power of our platform, it could respond with accurate mathematical responses that look at any part of your data and provide value. And that's where we had that aha moment where we saw that and we thought, this could be big because it provides almost like an extra hand on the team. And that extra hand happens to be an expert in treasury, in accounting, in law, in all of these different topics. And it also has the ability to do accurate calculations. So now you have the best of both worlds where you don't have to worry about the hallucination that we saw. It's very commonplace when people were playing with ChatGPT, because we're taking care of that. And instead, you can use it as a real leverage resource, right? If you're an executive or if you're someone in a leadership position and you're caught in a tough moment, maybe in a board meeting, whatever it might be, we truly imagine a reality where you can pull up this technology in Travada, ask a question, and immediately get the answer to that question in factual form displayed right in front of you. That is the breakthrough that we're excited about, and that's where we think that this technology is going to go. We're just at the beginning. I mean, and this is true of every industry, right? We're already seeing vast leaps of this technology, right? Whether it's in the form of chat, whether it's in the form of diffusion, using photos and video and all of that. Imagine what's going to happen 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now. Right. Like, these things will be able to think on their own, right? You'll be able to give it a directive and say, operate.
And which is so far past the Pope in a fuzzy coat and right. Other uses for it. Now, Brett, in terms of what this does for finance itself, there's kind of back office functionality. We know what the internet did for every retailer. It went from we got to be an online retailer and offline to now you just buy stuff. And if a store isn't both on an app in my pocket and at a mall, I kind of consider it rinky-dink. It's something for everything.
Where's my one click?
Exactly. Now, so what's going on with, how would you compare this moment with AI, with what Travada's doing, and with that prior revolution?
Well, I think, the whole, vision of Travada is we're bringing this automation to these manual or clunky workflows where finance teams need leverage, treasury teams need leverage, accounting teams. And so when you kind of look at what happened, go back 10, 12 years ago with the rise of cloud and how that massively changed the IT profession. AWS changed so many different things, and then Azure and Google Cloud now. So when you think they're just giving leverage to everything. So when you look at IT, instead of patching servers or maintaining your own data center in your own, back office closet, or you've got your own large data center in your corporate offices or down in the basement. Like, all of that had been outsourced by AWS. So instead of managing all of that thing that you didn't really need to manage, and you're sort of always playing defense, it's always managing uptime that was the hugest, the biggest risk and concern. Now you're not worrying about that. That's, for the, AWS. And so now you could go on offense. So the whole rise of digitization and all these companies, and everybody could think about how to then digitize their business and play offense, and all the IT folks, really what became more of the network administrator kind of shifted into a cloud architect, and all of that started to change a lot. So you think of fast forward to finance now, and we always talked about in those days, the last days of that is always going to be, or what's going to hit last is more finance and banking. And it's finally hitting now. We're having finance finally gets sort of its leverage moment or its automation moment. It hasn't hit yet. So despite everything that's been, automated and all of this leverage that most companies get, finance folks are still there. If you're in accounting and you're having to close the books and do a rapid close, even still, there's probably times in close that you're not going home at a reasonable hour to have dinner with your family, right? So that leverage just hasn't hit.
Because these kind of day-to-day defensive, if you will, functions are time dominant. It's the regulatory aspects of it, the different models you have to make, let alone, to your point, before you can even start running hypotheticals, before you can start even asking these questions. It's like, I've got to close the books. I got to make sure my POS is all lined up. I've got to make sure I'm doing my nuts and bolts. Going on the offensive means that you can actually turn your finance into something that's going to benefit your business, as opposed to just the operation that pays the bills and keeps the lights on.
A practical application too is, think when COVID hit, everybody's scrambling and buying toilet paper and all the run of goods in the store. But the finance folks aren't doing that. They're hunkered down in a room for the next 48 hours to figure out, are we going to be able to make payroll? Is 50% of our revenue going to fall off the map? And for some companies, it did. Massive pain. That 6 months was really scary. And all the finance folks are working overtime, because then it's less about closing the books, but are we going to have books to close?
Right.
We really need, this is more of an operating concern. We need to understand our cash flow.
And really recently, we had those banks closing down where you're running hypotheticals that never occurred to you. And it's not that institutions are unaware that fat tail risk exists as a thing. It's just that your cost benefit analysis of what happens if our bank shuts down on Monday, that was really, you're not going to assign a staff of 5 to go figure that out for you. That's just not a thing that was really likely enough to happen, yet it did.
Yep.
And it kind of catalyzed a lot of what we're seeing, it seems like, in AI right now.
Yep.
You know, Wade, coming from telecom, I think you'll like this analogy. It's one of the things that I've been thinking about for a while, is that within the world of finance, they've gone from the Stone Age, if you will, in terms of technology, on-prem, using, manual processes, using Excel, all of that, straight to AI, right? Straight to the most advanced, most innovative solutions, right? And it reminds me of, if you think of South America, or if you think of Africa, and how they kind of skipped the whole stage of putting wire down, creating infrastructure, and went straight to wireless and created, 4G, 5G networks right out of the gate, and kind of skipped that whole process. It's been really interesting to see how the world of finance, yes, they missed the whole cloud wave for the last few years, but they're getting to get on board with the best of cloud right now, where cloud has weapons that it didn't have 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's creating weird moments of leverage that I think are even changing the roles that some of the folks in finance might play. And that behavior change has been the most fascinating to see. And we get to have a front row seat at it. We actually maintain a community called the Trove here at Travada, where we communicate directly with customers and folks that are part of our community. And seeing their reaction to AI has been fascinating, because it's their first taste of how their roles will change. There are some that are embracing it, some that are worried about it, and some that are in between, right? And having to navigate through that and see that behavior change has been one of the most fascinating pieces of this to me.
And is it fair to say that a lot like the internet, where you have outliers, that companies that manage to stay offline and it's quaint and cute, but essentially this AI is going to become it's going to become a fabric element of the way corporations work now, as opposed to a thing that you can choose to opt in or out. You need to be in, and you better figure out how that's going to happen. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Is it that extreme?
If you think some of the basics of just understanding, like when you start your day, where do we stand? What were, some of the numbers from yesterday, or just all of the usual routine aspects of finance, you automate a lot of those things. And there's processes to automate some of that stuff today, but there's a lot of these advanced, early warning signs, or you take that to an entirely different level to be able to, bring up stuff that could be missed easily, because it's this very rule-based, I'm only going to report on these handful of things. This is my dashboard. This is what I get. But it's very limited. Yeah. So when you look at now AI, just putting that to work, now you're getting alerted to all these other things. So if we all see Iron Man, and
I was about to go there to J.A.R.V.I.S.
Yeah, and it's always anticipating. It's thinking ahead. It's like thinking for you in some ways, just keeping you at your best. And I think that whole aspect of optimization, if you think about best practice in finance, you're always trying to do that, but that's a hard thing, because you're constantly having to reinvent everything that you just did, and you thought you dialed in this process, and now you're going to flex it. You're going to kind of make it some improvements. And like in the days of Amazon, it was this bias for action was kind of a core phrase. Well, bias for action, like that becomes a lot easier when you can put AI to work, and it's constantly finding ways to improve at every turn. And we can do that and put that in play. I mean, that's just making your life so much easier. And it strips out so much
of the complexity, because it has the regulations. You can run all kinds of hypotheticals in finance, but it's no more sophisticated than what if I sold a hamburger to everyone in China. there's more to it. You get ripped off by all the unions and transportation. I mean, it's the analogy being, in finance, you don't want to make a bunch of wrong steps. You don't want to assume a bunch of things that
you can't be wrong. I think that's a thing that's always happening. We used to kind of joke at Amazon when you work, all these late hours and you have earnings release, and then earnings release is happening and the call is happening, and then we're just kind of sitting back, just exhausted, and then we're kind of joking and say, okay, who's going to get fired this quarter? Like, as in, who made that mistake? That we're all going to find out, because you're working so hard to compile all this information, and you're spending very little time reviewing to make sure that the information is right. And that was the biggest fear. That's a huge fear in finance. So now to be able to automate and really focus on more of that time of review and quality control and assurance and just, hey, let's double click on that and look at how that can really make some big improvements.
That's the big
within
thing.
The business.
This is a user experience change. And I think we spend a lot of time talking about the technology of AI. I think more time needs to be spent on the fact that behavior change is rooted in the fact that your user experience is fundamentally changing. You use the analogy of J.A.R.V.I.S. Well, Tony Stark, the reason why we love him as a character is because he seems to operate at a speed of intelligence that is almost, at another level, right? Well, a lot of it is because he has accessibility to information, and any creative thought that pops into his mind, he can get immediate feedback on whether or not he's on the right track by bouncing it off of J.A.R.V.I.S, because J.A.R.V.I.S can then do complex, wild scenario, calculations, whatever it might be. And Tony, all he has to do is say, run me a simulation of me being able to do, a space flight in my suit. How long will I last? And J.A.R.V.I.S is like, no problem, 10 seconds, I'll figure it out for you. In the same way, the world of finance is similar to, if you're a writer in Hollywood or wherever it might be, you experience writer's block, right? You experience those creative, quagmires, if you will. And the reason for it is because if you have a thought, hey, I wonder what this might be, the penalty for that thought is, well, I have to go do the work of putting all this together so I can see if that thought was worth it.
It stifles creativity.
It completely stifles
because you think about hey, this is a good idea, but I'm not going to do that because that's going to take 3 weeks of work.
Again, you return to the risk reward and the hypotheticals. What happens if our revenues fall 25% in the case of COVID? What happens if the customers don't show up at all? Well, that seems crazy. We're a shopping mall. What do you mean the customers don't show up? That's impossible.
Yeah.
Turns out it wasn't.
It's happening.
And that's where the breakthrough happens, I think, because if you get used to that kind of behavior and you start to trust that kind of system, just like Tony can trust J.A.R.V.I.S flying into space and needs a last second analysis, you start to operate differently at another level, a different level of speed, a different level of intuition and creativity. And I think that's where AI, if you can strip the fear of it's going to take over the world and be ultimately, Terminator, you will be at another creative level because you are operating on the shoulders of a knowledge base that you can possibly store in your own mind, right? And that's what's exciting about it.
And you're just so outgunned. The people that don't have this as a tool, who aren't using it.
Absolutely.
Again, it's the point of leverage. Yeah. If someone has that much leverage over your rinky-dink kind of...
so many times, too, even as a manager, your team is just constantly tapped. They're just maxed out. And you have people on your team also that are, maybe a couple of the ones that are just rock stars, and you always give them the hardest things. And you might come up with an idea, and it could be really impactful for the company, but there's these pause moments. You say, I can't give it to my team right now because if I do, they're going to kill me, or they're just going to spill over. They're going to
tap
out. They can't take on anymore. That's constantly happening right now in finance, and all that's doing is at the detriment of the company. The company could benefit from that. So I think that just becomes this natural, because you're overflowing with all this work, just this natural stifling on creativity. Another aspect too is that you're when you go in. So many times I'd go into a board meeting. And you spent so much time preparing all the information. You stayed up late at night. You're not in a mode where you feel like you're on your A game to present, or you're going to talk, even articulately about, some.
There's that
some
balance.
Aspect.
The more prepared you are, the more tapped you are presenting.
And you're so in the weeds dealing with all this stuff. It's hard to pull out and talk about something macro when you've been dealing with something that's so micro. And I think that aspect is going to change as well. So these are very practical things. These are huge things that are going to really tip that whole 80-20 or 90-10, all that compilation, all of the review and creativity, or just benefiting the business, creating efficiencies. that whole paradigm is going to be a massive shift. This is all coming. I think the biggest barrier, maybe the segue to kind of talk a little bit about, is that how we're already seeing it a little bit now that we've released it in the product. The first real Gen AI tool in finance and treasury, we've had, companies right away saying, I need to get permission to use this because we have some.
It was the first thing that happened.
Security risk would obviously be emphasized. We'll get into that. I want to leave this segment here. Hey, thanks, you guys. Listen, AI, it's here. It's right now. And the risk is you don't weaponize your finance. You just build a little castle and you wait for the barbarians to get here. We'll keep you in tune at J.A.R.V.I.S to avoid that horrible fate.